Welcome to Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast that's your ultimate guide to mastering personal finances and unlocking the secrets of entrepreneurship. Each week, we dive into the world of personal finance and business development and have fascinating conversations with industry experts, seasoned entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their insights, strategies, and stories to help you get ahead in life. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur looking to scale your business or someone just starting out on your financial path, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable insights.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Panayiotou, certified financial planning professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And on today's episode, we are going to go over 7 tips to help you network better. But as always, before we get into the topic of today's episode, the free tip of the week. And this one's a bit technical, but it is extremely valuable. So you're going to have to listen up. When it comes to analyzing a business to invest in, you must, I repeat, you must understand the concept of return on invested capital. So I'm going to give you the technical definition of it, and I'm going to explain why it's really valuable for you to use, and then I'll tell you how to use it accordingly. So return on invested capital, if you use it from a math equation, you take the profit of the business and then you divide that by the equity in the business plus the debt. Now, what that tells you is, with debt in mind, for every dollar you give the business, that is what they are earning on your dollar. Now, notice how I told you that is not going to immediately translate into that's what the stock is going to earn. However, a high return on invested capital generally will bode well for you in the long run. Now, I see a lot of people make the mistake with return on invested capital, and they look at it just on its own within the business. So I'm just going to take my brother's business for an example, okay? Putting him on the spot, which he absolutely hates, which is why I'm doing it, because that's what brothers do. So what if my brother's business was public? And he comes up to me and goes, Chris, as a potential shareholder, my return on invested capital, if you put $1 with me, is 48%. Without really getting into the weeds of it, I'd go, whoa, Ty, that is freaking banging. Like, that is fantastic. Where do I sign? But what if I started comparing other businesses that he is in competition with, and his competition's average return on invested capital was in the 60s? Well, from a relative standpoint, he's not as efficient at earning a return on my dollar as opposed to the competition. So the reason why I bring that up is people like to use return on invested capital as just a standalone, a standalone stat line in a business's analysis. You've got to use it as a comparative tool. And once you understand that, you're going to be that much closer in an immense way to figuring out if a company is worth your money or not. So I know that was a little long piece of advice, but it's extremely valuable, very technical. Tried to make it as easy as possible to digest. If you need to go back and re-listen to it, highly recommend you do so. And if you don't, it's your retirement, not mine. So let's get into the 7 tips to help you network better, because that's why you're here. The first one is obvious yet not so obvious. Fill your calendar with networking events. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, the obvious part is if you're going to network better, you need more reps. And if you need more reps, you need to go to more networking events. That's pretty freaking obvious. What isn't as obvious with this, and it's a little caveat, after you go to reoccurring networking events in certain organizations, ask yourself after 3 months, okay, what have I gotten from this? Now, early on in your career, you're going to want to just go, and it's kind of like, I don't really care how you feel about it. You just need to keep going and going and going because your calendar needs to be filled. And not only does your calendar need to be filled, but you need to become known. And if you want to become known, you need to be everywhere all the time. But over time, what is going to happen is even though you fill your time with networking events, you're going to quickly realize which ones are higher or lower quality for you. And then very similar to what I've said in the past, you're going to want to hone in on those events more and more and more to get a higher return on your investment on networking better. The second thing I want you to do, and this one's a little unique, I want you to look up the host of every networking event. And I'm not just talking about like, where is it located for the address? I'm talking about who is actually hosting it. And I'll give you an example of what I did in the past. So in our industry, you can't just cold call people for personal financial planning, but I also create retirement plans for companies. And so for me, and we manage them. For me, I quickly learned, wait a second, you could cold call businesses because a business isn't going to close off their phone line. And so what I was doing was when I was going to these networking events, I would figure out, first off, if let me backtrack. If there was a retirement plan in a business I wanted to take over their 401k, I would go online, do some research because it's all public knowledge. And then I would call and do what I do best to get in the door and all that. But from a networking events perspective, you kind of have an easy leg up with that because if you get to that place of hosting the event, generally speaking, these companies that are hosting the networking events are going to be pretty successful. That's why they're hosting it, because if not, they couldn't afford to do so. And what I would do is I would always seek out whoever the owner is or partner of that business. And so when I got to that event, I would lock them down. I would thank them for hosting it. And then I would just learn as much about them as humanly possible. And very similar to past episodes where I tell you, how to get people on the calendar and all that fun stuff. That's where I would go and work my magic. And so just by simply looking up who is hosting the networking event, that's going to pay dividends. And then for whatever reason, if you don't connect with someone there that is hosting the event, but they did, what you could do? You could send a letter saying, hey, I was really trying to connect with you. I wanted to learn more about your business. I think there's a lot of opportunity where we can work together, but I wanted to make it more personal. And I would love to set up a time to chat with you and then get on your calendar if it makes sense. Do whatever you can to get the easy wins. Now, number 3, I want you to get a gauge of what type of event this is. Now, I'm going to explain that a little bit more in depth. Some networking events are what I call pure play networking events. It's just a bunch of salesmen trying to sell each other. And frankly, those are really good events because even though you might not get any business out of it per se, you are honing your craft so well. And if you can sell a salesman, you are golden, absolutely golden. And you know what I've also recognized with people that are really into sales? They like being sold. In fact, they love being sold a good product or service. And on top of that, I'll tell you, the majority of people that we've worked with over the years that are in some type of sales role that have become successful for years, not like the sleazy ones that can kind of lure you in and then they kind of fizzle out. The long-term sales people we work with are genuinely great people. And so if you are going through, your pitch or whatever the case is, and you've built up rapport, you know what you could do? Just honestly ask who you're talking to. Hey, you know what? Like, I want you to listen to my pitch of my service or what I do. And could you give me some feedback? First off, they're going to be stunned that you even asked that because most people don't have the balls to do it. And then second, what's going to happen is they're going to think this guy, in my case, is so genuinely open and honest and vulnerable. Like he trusts me enough to be that vulnerable. I can only imagine what he is like with treating his vulnerability and openness with his clients and customers that he has. I need this guy in my life. I can almost guarantee you that's what is going to happen, unless the people suck and then you don't want them in your life anyway. So another type of event that it's a great networking event, but it's got to be a little bit more nuanced. You got to have some suave to it. It's like a foundation event or a charity or a nonprofit event. That's where you can't necessarily go as hard in the paint as a pure play, say that 10 times fast, networking event. The reason why I bring that up too is once you research the event, you get that gauge and feel. And then once you get that gauge and feel of what the event's going to be, you basically turn your sales caliber to match the feeling of the event. Now, one thing I want you to note, and this is going to sound kind of influencer-y in a gaggable way, but you're just going to have to get over it. Really, if you pull back the curtain, every single meeting and interaction that you have is a networking event. And you've just got to know how to play your hand. So whether you're at a networking event, you're at a charity event, you're at a business partners event, or a business partner's office, you're with an existing client that you've had for years, guess what? That is a networking meeting. Even though you've worked with them maybe for a decade, for experienced professionals out there in whatever craft you're pulling, every single event is a networking event, and you've got to remember that. Now, the fourth tip to help you network better before we go into the commercial break, once you get to the networking event, and I brought this up earlier, but I have to repeat it. Immediately find the host and start up a conversation by first thanking them for the event. Now, not only does that mean whoever is hosting it, as far as like the business, I would also take a step further and talk about the organization. So a lot of these organizations that host these networking events, the Chamber of Commerce in whatever city or town you're in, Rotary, there's going to be a number of these like local quasi-governmental agencies that are hosting business-minded events. Not only would I go to the host of the business actually hosting it, I would actually go to the CEO or the CFO of the Chamber of Commerce or the Rotary or whatever the case may be, and connect with them immediately and thank them for all of the events that they coordinate over the years, and then use the same framework that I mentioned earlier for tip number 2. Because if you can get these organizations who have connections to your entire community, I almost knocked my table over because I'm getting so excited. If you can lock that connection down, you give it 3 years, they are going to be sending you so much business. You're going to have the best problem in the world in business, where you have so much business coming in, you don't know what to do with it. So we're going to close out with the last 3 tips to help you network better. Welcome back to the show. We're going to close this puppy out with the last 3 tips to help you network better. And these are doozies. Maybe I'm a little biased. I think they're the most important because the best is for last. And so let's get into it with number 5. Once you have thanked the host and possibly given them a business card and got them on your books to learn more about them and possibly help each other in business, of course, get out into the crowd, and your only goal is to connect with as many people as possible, gain as many business cards as possible after you have learned as much about every single one of them you come in contact with, and apply the same process as you did with the host. I cannot stress this enough, and I've said this before many times, borderline irritated, but I will get over it because I'm going to say it again because that's what we do on podcasts. We repeat ourselves a lot, and you got to get used to it. When you speak with anyone at a networking event, don't even pretend, convince yourself that nobody cares about you. You have to care about them, okay? The more you care about them and the more you ask truly profound questions, the more naturally they are going to want to help you, because subconsciously they're actually going to feel bad not helping you. You know, like, how bad is it if you just leave like a really good person out to dry? Like, that sucks. That absolutely sucks. Now, number 6, when you are meeting with people, make the conversation not only 100% about them, but I'm going to take it a step further. Only until they cannot help themselves but ask who you are and what you do is when you actually tell them. But then once you immediately throw it back to focusing on them, they're going to be so mind blown at your relentless focus on the character that they possess. They cannot help but remember you forever. So I actually want to talk about a formula, and it's kind of a different way of saying number 5. This was probably oh gosh, 6 or 7 years ago, I was doing some research for our industry, but there was one of my favorite authors in our industry and financial columnists is a man by the name of Dan Solin. And what I love about Dan Solin is he's got a totally different perspective on sales and business growth that I do. And it's not better or worse. It's just different. So Dan was he was an attorney. Then I think he was an advisor for a short stint, and then he now coaches advisors, financial advisors, on building their business. But what's really unique about Dan in the world of sales is he is extremely introverted, which is normally not the breakdown or the mold of a traditional salesman. So I remember reading up on him, and the reason why I found Dan's research so valuable was because I'm actually diving into the minds of how introverts think. Because I'm not introverted. I'm about as extroverted as you're going to get. Okay. Probably to a fault. My wife would probably agree with that. And my brother and my mom and my sister, basically everyone. But I digress. Dan, the reason why I loved what he wrote was not only was he introverted, he used it to his advantage. And he actually came up with a formula on how his framework will lead to an ultimate success in networking, which will eventually bring in more money for you anyways. So when you're chatting with someone and you're only learning about them, what happens is you start building empathy. And because all you do is care. All you do is care about them objectively. And when you show someone that you care and that empathy is compounding, the next thing that happens is you start compounding trust with whoever that person is. Now, it's actually pretty fascinating because what happens in the body when you start building empathy and you start building trust with someone is you start to release oxytocin within the body, and it relaxes you. It de-stresses you. It brings you closer to that person. It brings your shoulders down and your chest is back. Your shoulders are rolled back and go, okay, I can be vulnerable. I can be comfortable. I can be truly who I am with whoever I'm talking to. And the empathy that leads to trust, which leads to the release of oxytocin, the result of all of that is something really magical. You get business and you build clients. It's really that simple. And so that's why I cannot stress enough, the more you make a conversation about them, and you're not just doing it to just putz around and talk about like surface level stuff, truly ask profound questions. I would always ask yourself subconsciously when you're asking someone whatever in a conversation, how can I get more profound with my questions? Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. How did you get to that? Explain that more. I'm curious. Dig deeper. Sometimes even tell the person that. They're going to be very thankful that you did. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we close out this episode, lucky number 7, I want you to continue down the relationship building line, regardless if a sale comes from it or not, because either way, you will earn a sale in some way, shape, or form someday. So this can be really, really defeating when you're just getting out there and you're networking and you're trying to build something, whether it's, you're trying to get more sales or you're just building your business, which also relates in more sales anyway. And then especially more difficult if you're introverted. So what happens, and I see this with a lot of people, is they go to these networking events and they know, oh yeah, my goal is to network and build up connections, whatever the case may be. They make a mistake when they're chatting with people and halfway through the conversation, you realize, I'm probably not going to get anything out of this meeting in this person. And it's not intentional. It's not like you're being an intentional jerk. You just kind of know, I'm probably not going to get anything out of this person. Like, I don't really see how we could work or relate or whatever the case may be. Now, in that moment, what ends up happening is you kind of start to shut down. Like when you're listening to people, like for those of you actually watching this, like I'm looking into the camera right now and now I'm looking through the camera. Okay. sure there's going to be some freeze frame out there of me just looking like an idiot. But you get my point. There's a difference between when someone's looking into you and then through you. At that moment, you actually have an amazing opportunity because whoever you're talking to can smell it a mile away. And they might even know, hey, I'm probably not going to get anything out of this guy either. And so it's this awkward, disconnection. And then it kind of leaves a bad taste of it in everyone's mouth. You know what you could do as a conversation's going on and you start to realize that not only do you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, you actually let them know, you know what? I actually don't see directly how we could relate, but I think you're a genuinely good person and I want to help you out in some way, shape, or form. What can I do to be of the best help to you? That's it. I mean, that is it. If you tell someone that and they know, because right now you put the nail in the coffin of trust. I mean, they can't not trust you because they felt the same way. They're going to have an immense release of oxytocin because now they're not uptight and tense and nervous. They're going to want to help you in one way, shape, or form because you're going out of your way, basically volunteering to help them, and it won't. You're not going to get anything out of it. That is if you didn't get anything out of this episode other than the very, very end, that is probably the best networking tip you are ever going to receive. When in doubt, when you're chatting with someone, even when you know you can't get something out of them, you do everything in your power to leave them better than when you connected with them in the first place. So that does it for today's episode on the 7 tips to help you network better. As always, until next week, I miss you dearly and keep capitalizing. Take care. As always, thank you for joining me today. If you have questions about today's episode or any personal finance questions, please reach out to me at Cap and Capitalize on Instagram, Chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com, or via our website, capitalizepodcast.com. If you want more Capitalize Your Finances content, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com and check out our blog, free resources, book, and online course. As always, I'm your host, Christopher Paniotu, Certified Financial Planning Professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
These materials are provided for general information and educational purposes based upon publicly available information from sources believed to be reliable. The information in these materials may change at any time and without notice. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only. 401k benefits may be subject to change at your employer, the governing pension, or benefit organization's discretion. Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. Capitalize Your Finances LLC is a separate entity from LPL Financial. Capitalize Your Finances is not registered as a broker-dealer or investment advisor. CRPS conferred by College for Financial Planning. The people and companies mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capitalize Your Finances.